Have you ever wondered what secrets might be hiding in the words we've forgotten? What if an entire world of lost kingdoms and unheard prophecies was waiting just beyond the edge of our understanding, preserved in languages we no longer speak? That's the incredible power of the Elven languages. They're not just beautiful collections of sounds and symbols. They're living maps to realms we thought were only legend, holding truths that could reshape everything we know about history and magic. And today, we're going to explore how these ancient tongues guard the keys to mysteries older than time itself. Before we begin this journey together, I'd love to know where in the world are you joining us from today, and what time is it where you are? Let us know in the comments below whether you're listening under the midday sun or beneath a sky full of stars. You're now part of a story that spans centuries and continents, and I'm so glad you're here. There's a tale I want to share with you, one that begins with a young elven linguist named Alara. Like many of us who feel pulled toward the mysteries of the past, Alara spent her days surrounded by ancient scrolls and fragile manuscripts, each one whispering fragments of stories long silenced by time. But one day, she uncovered something extraordinary, a forgotten dialect hidden within a text everyone else had dismissed as mere poetry. As she traced the elegant, curling script with her fingertips, she realized this was no ordinary language. It was a key, a living clue, pointing toward a hidden kingdom, one that had vanished from history, along with prophecies so powerful that speaking them aloud could awaken magic that had slept for ages. Alara's discovery didn't just ignite her curiosity, it set her on a path filled with wonder, danger, and the thrill of the unknown. She knew that pursuing this truth meant defying her elders and stepping into a world where every word carried weight, every syllable held power. And that's exactly what we're going to do together in this video: unlock the hidden doors within language itself, and venture into stories where myth and history blur into one. So settle in, open your mind to the possibilities, and let's uncover how the Elven languages hold the keys to kingdoms waiting to be remembered. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs as she carefully unrolled the fragile scroll in the dim, dust-filled light of her study. The text she had found wasn't just written in an old dialect. It was a cipher, a deliberate labyrinth of words designed to hide its true meaning from any casual observer. The first line seemed to describe the blooming of a silver flower under a twin moon sky, a common enough poetic image in Elven literature, but Alara saw the pattern others had missed. The word for silver, Celebrindle, was also an ancient place name, and twin moons wasn't a celestial event, but a reference to a specific architectural feature: two arched windows found only in the oldest parts of the city, in a wing that housed the sealed historical archives. This was no poem, it was a set of directions. Following the clue meant venturing into a part of the library complex that was strictly off-limits, a repository for texts deemed too dangerous or too powerful for general study. The air grew colder as she descended the spiraling staircase, the sounds of the main library fading into an eerie silence. The sealed archive door was made of age-darkened wood and reinforced with bands of cold iron, and standing before it were two stoic guardians, their faces impassive beneath polished helms. Elara's mind raced. She couldn't simply ask for entry. Her research was unsanctioned, a direct violation of the Elder's decrees. Her only way in was to not be seen at all. She remembered a forgotten passage mentioned in a marginal note of a geography text, a service corridor used by scribes centuries ago. Holding her breath, she slipped behind a towering bookcase, her fingers finding a nearly invisible seam in the stone wall. With a soft click, a hidden door swung inward, revealing a tight, dark passage that smelled of old parchment and dry earth. It was a route forgotten by time, and it led her directly into the heart of the restricted archive. The room she entered was vast and circular, dominated by a great stone pedestal upon which rested not a book, but a complex linguistic puzzle lock. It was a beautiful and terrifying device, a series of concentric silver rings, each inscribed with runes from different Elven eras, surrounding a central crystal lens. To unlock it, the rings had to be rotated to form a coherent phrase across all layers, a phrase that would complete the couplet from her scroll. The stakes were immense. A single error wouldn't just mean failure. It would likely trigger an alarm, bringing the guardians down upon her instantly. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. Her hands trembled as she began to turn the first ring, aligning the rune for star with the marker. She rotated the second, finding path, and the third, water. But the phrase star path water was meaningless. This wasn't a literal translation. It was a metaphorical one. The key was in the grammar. She realigned the rings, thinking not in nouns but in verbs and direction. To journey beneath the silent witness, the runes clicked into place, and a soft blue light glowed from within the crystal lens, projecting a shimmering, intricate map onto the far wall. It was a cartograph of a realm not found on any known map, a hidden valley surrounded by mountains that curved like a sleeping dragon. But as the light from the map illuminated her awestruck face, a floorboard creaked outside the hidden entrance she'd used. She was not alone. The faint but unmistakable sound of armored footsteps was moving closer, and the only way out was now blocked. The projected map burned itself into Alara's memory just as the heavy footfalls of the Guardians reached the archive door. With a surge of adrenaline, she darted back into the narrow service passage, the hidden door whispering shut behind her mere moments before the main entrance groaned open. Heart pounding, she pressed herself against the cold stone wall in the absolute darkness, listening to the confused murmurs of the guards as they found the puzzle lock activated, but the room seemingly empty. She waited until their voices faded, then followed the twisting passage up and out, emerging into a lesser-used hallway far from the archive, the image of the hidden valley, now her most precious secret. This was no simple map. It was a linguistic cartograph, where place names were not labels but instructions. The central feature, a forest depicted with trees whose leaves were shaped like distinct phonemes, was labeled the Whispering Woods. To any other scholar, this might be a romanticized title. But Alara knew that in the High Sylvan dialect, the word for whisper, fifth fath, was a homophone for the term describing the specific resonant frequency of a particular type of quartz crystal. The map wasn't just pointing to a forest, it was declaring that the first key, a crystalline lexicon, was buried somewhere within, its location hidden not by earth, but by language itself. Venturing into the Whispering Woods was a perilous undertaking that went against every warning she had ever been given. The forest was ancient, a living entity governed by its own rules and guarded by spirits who viewed all intrusion as a violation. As she crossed the threshold from the sun-drenched meadows into the deep, dappled gloom of the woods, the very air changed. It grew thick and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers. The sounds of the outside world vanished, replaced by a low, constant hum that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves, a symphony of whispers in a language just on the edge of comprehension. Her first challenge came swiftly. The path, clear moments before, dissolved into a tangle of thorny undergrowth and identical-looking ancient oaks. This was no natural maze. It was a sentient border, and the territorial tree spirits, the Joatha, were stirring. She felt their presence first as a pressure in the air, then saw their forms coalesce from the shifting patterns of light and shadow between the trunks. Tall, slender beings of woven bark and shimmering leaf, their eyes like chips of amber. They did not speak, but projected their intent directly into her mind, a wave of pure territorial defiance that felt like a physical wall. Turn back. You are not welcome. This was where her academic knowledge became her only shield. She knew the Joatha were not hostile by nature. They were protective. To force her way through would be a declaration of war. Instead, she stopped and slowly knelt, placing her palms flat on the moss-covered ground in a gesture of respect she had read about in a treatise on Sylvan etiquette. Then she began to speak, but she did not use the common tongue. She used the oldest form of Sylvan she knew, the root dialect from which all tree speech evolved. The words were slow, deliberate, and full of reverence, each syllable formed with care. I am not a blade that cuts, nor a fire that consumes, she intoned, the ancient words feeling strange yet powerful on her lips. I am a seeker of lost songs, a mender of broken whispers. I walk the old paths with respect, seeking only what the earth has chosen to remember. The effect was immediate. The oppressive pressure lifted. The whispering in the trees shifted from a threatening murmur to a curious, questioning lilt. One of the Joatha spirits glided closer, its head tilting. It reached out a hand not of wood, but of living, green light, and gently touched her forehead. Alara felt a warmth spread through her, and an image flashed in her mind, a specific, massive hawthorn tree, its bark silvered with age, standing alone in a small sunlit clearing. It was an invitation, a granted passage. The spirits parted, and a new path, previously invisible, opened between the trees, leading deeper into the heart of the woods. She had not fought her way through. She had spoken her way through, proving that the true key to navigating this realm was not strength, but understanding. The massive hawthorn tree stood exactly as the vision had shown her, its ancient trunk split into two great pillars that framed a hollow space within. Nestled inside that natural vault, shimmering with a soft internal light, was the Crystalline Lexicon. It was not a book in any traditional sense, but a complex geometric form, a core of pure, clear crystal, from which countless smaller facets grew like leaves on a branch, each one etched with minuscule, glowing runes. As Alara reached for it, her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the first tangible key to a forgotten world. But the moment her fingers closed around the cool, smooth crystal, a silent alarm was triggered. No sound erupted, but a wave of pure magical energy pulsed outward from the tree, a ripple in the fabric of the world that would be felt by anyone attuned to such forces. In a secluded study, many miles away, a rival linguist named Kalin jolted upright from his work. A complex orrery of intertwined metal rings on his desk, which tracked significant magical disturbances, began to spin wildly, its central needle pointing unerringly toward the whispering woods. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. He had spent decades trying to brute force his way into the very secrets Alara had just found through understanding, and now her success had lit a beacon he could not ignore. He immediately began gathering his things, his mind already racing with plans to intercept her and claim the Lexicon for his own. Back in the clearing, Alara felt the ward's aftermath, not as a sound, but as a sudden, profound silence that fell over the woods. The curious whispers of the Joatha ceased entirely, replaced by a watchful, waiting tension. She knew instantly what she had done. Ancient protections are not merely locks, they are announcements. She had taken the artifact, and in doing so, she had told the entire forest, and potentially anyone else listening, exactly where she was and what she now possessed. Clutching the Lexicon to her chest, she turned to flee, but the path that had brought her here was already gone, the forest closing ranks behind her. She was no longer a welcomed guest. She was a carrier of something precious, and the woods themselves would now test her worthiness to keep it. She ran, not with any sense of direction, but with a desperate need to put distance between herself and the hawthorn tree. The Lexicon grew warm in her hands, and to her astonishment, the runes on its facets began to glow more brightly, their light pulsing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. It was reacting to her panic, to her flight. She realized it wasn't just a static map or a simple dictionary. It was an interactive guide, and her emotional state was activating it. As she ducked under a low-hanging branch, the light from the crystal flared, and the runes rearranged themselves, projecting a faint, shimmering arrow of light onto the forest floor ahead of her, pointing toward a denser, darker part of the woods. It was offering her a path, but it was a path away from the known world, deeper into the heart of the ancient and untamed wilds. The choice was terrifyingly simple: turn back and almost certainly run into Kalin, a man known for his ruthless ambition and disregard for the old ways, or trust the artifact and plunge into the unknown depths, where even the bravest elves feared to tread. With the image of Kalin's cold, triumphant smile burning in her mind, she chose the unknown. She followed the Lexicon's guiding light, the artifact now feeling less like a treasure and more like a partner in this desperate dance. Its soft glow, her only comfort, as the canopy above thickened into an eternal twilight. The familiar sounds of the forest, giving way to the deep, resonant silence of a place untouched by time. Breathing heavily in the deepening gloom of the ancient forest, Alara's focus narrowed to the warm crystal in her hands. Its light pulsed in time with her own heartbeat, a silent, steady rhythm that felt both alien and deeply familiar. Without conscious thought, a single word formed on her lips, a whispered question in the high Sylvan tongue she had used to appease the guardians of the wood. "What are you?" the Lexicon flared in response, not with a simple answer, but with a breathtaking display of light and language. It leaped from her palms, hovering in the air before her, and its countless facets began to spin. From its core, it projected a complex, three-dimensional tapestry of interlocking holographic runes that glowed with a soft golden light, each symbol rotating slowly in the silent air. This was no simple map or list of words. The runes arranged themselves into elegant, flowing sentences that hung in the space between the trees, telling a story of breathtaking scope and profound tragedy. It spoke of the kingdom of Lidhendor, the jewel of the Twilight Realm, a civilization so advanced its magic was woven into the very language its people spoke. They didn't just cast spells, they conversed with the elements, their words shaping reality itself. But the prophecy detailed in the shimmering text warned of a great silence, a magical cataclysm they called the Unsinging. It described how the kingdom's greatest source of power, a nexus of elemental harmony, was shattered not by an invading army, but by a single dissonant chord struck from within, a betrayal that fractured their reality and caused Lidhendor to fade from the world, becoming unseen, unreachable, locked away behind veils of forgotten sound. The final lines of the holographic prophecy burned brightest, declaring that the kingdom's return was not a matter of simple discovery, but of active restoration. It could only be made whole again by one who could gather the 3 lost keys and speak the words of unmaking at the site of the great betrayal. The Lexicon itself was the first key, the key of memory, holding the history and the linguistic blueprint of Lidhendor. But to fully awaken its power and reveal the path to the kingdom's hidden heart, it required its counterparts, the key of harmony, an artifact that could realign the fractured magical frequencies, and the key of truth, which would reveal the full story of the betrayal and the name of the one who caused the fall. As the last rune faded, leaving the forest darker than before, the full weight of her discovery settled upon Alara. This was far bigger than academic glory or a thrilling adventure. She wasn't just looking for a lost city. She was holding the first step toward healing a wound in the very fabric of her world's history. The responsibility was immense, and the path ahead was clear. She had to find the other 2 keys before someone like Kalin did. He would see them merely as sources of power to be controlled, tools for personal ambition. But in the right hands, guided by respect and understanding, they were instruments of restoration. The Lexicon, now dormant again in her hand, was no longer just a guide. It was a charge, and her journey had suddenly transformed from a personal quest into a sacred duty to a kingdom that had been waiting centuries for its song to be sung again. The Lexicon's light now pulsed with a gentle, insistent rhythm, its golden glow no longer projecting complex runes, but instead serving as a subtle compass. It pulled Alara's attention eastward, toward the distant, shimmering expanse of Lake Lorlan. Every elf knew the stories of the Sunken Library, a place spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It wasn't a myth, it was a tragedy. The great library of Lorlan, a center of learning said to rival the oldest Elven universities, had been lost centuries ago when a magical cataclysm caused the very ground beneath it to sink, and the serene waters of the lake had risen to claim it, preserving its countless scrolls and artifacts in a silent, watery tomb. Most believed its treasures were forever out of reach, guarded by the depths and the enigmatic water sprites who made the lake their home. Reaching the lake's pebbled shore felt like stepping into a different world. The air was cool and misty, filled with the soft lapping of crystal clear water against stone. In the distance, the lake was a vast mirror reflecting the sky, but closer to the center, the water darkened to a deep, mysterious blue, hinting at the profound depths below. This was the domain of the Nixies, the water sprites. They were creatures of caprice and ancient magic, bound to the element they embodied, They did not trade in gold or favors. Their currency was artistry, novelty, and respect. To simply dive in and search would be seen as a grave insult, and the sprites were known to drown those who trespassed without their blessing. Alara's only way in was through conversation, a barter conducted in their own fluid, melodic tongue. She sat on a smooth, flat rock at the water's edge, the Lexicon resting in her lap. She closed her eyes, not to search for words, but to listen. She tuned her ears to the rhythm of the lake itself, the gentle push and pull of the waves, the drip of water from an overhanging branch, the almost musical plink of a fish breaking the surface. This was the foundation of the Nixie language, a tongue built not on static vocabulary, but on the ever-changing flow and cadence of water itself. Speaking it required her to become an instrument, to shape her breath and voice into a mimicry of these natural sounds, layering meaning onto the melody. After a long moment of stillness, she began to sing. Her voice was soft and low at first, a series of flowing syllables that mimicked the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. A low rill nen, Sila Amar, she sang, which in the common tongue meant, waters of ancient memory, shine with the light of years. There was no immediate response, but the air grew still, the mist seeming to thicken around her. She continued, her song growing in complexity, incorporating a clicking sound made with her tongue against the roof of her mouth to imitate the tapping of water on stone, and a soft, breathy exhalation that sounded like a rising bubble. She was not just reciting a memorized phrase, she was composing a living poem in their language, an offering of sound and respect. The water before her began to swirl, and 3 figures emerged from the depths. The Nixies were breathtaking. Their forms seemed to be woven from water and light, shimmering and translucent. Their hair flowed around them like currents, and their eyes held the deep, ancient blue of the lake's heart. They regarded her with expressions of cool curiosity. The tallest one glided forward, and when she spoke, her voice was the sound of a bubbling spring meeting a deep, still pool. You sing the old patterns, land walker, but why? The deep-kept stories are not for your kind. Elara met the sprite's gaze, her heart hammering. This was the moment. She had to state her purpose not as a demand, but as a mutually beneficial exchange. I do not come to take, she sang back, her voice carefully matching the sprite's cadence. I come to complete. A silence lives in the world, a broken song. The memory you guard holds one note needed to make it whole again. I offer a story you do not know, a tale of a kingdom lost not to water, but to sound, in return for a glimpse of what was sunken. The lead Nixie's head tilted. Barter was a language they understood perfectly. A new story is a rare treasure, but the archives are deep, and the pressure of the water is great. Your land body is fragile. You may enter, land walker, but you must breathe as we breathe, and see as we see, for a time. Before Alara could respond, the sprite raised a hand, and a single, perfect sphere of water, glowing with a soft aquamarine light, lifted from the lake's surface and floated toward her. The gift of the Nixie. It will be your air and your light, but know this, it is bound to our goodwill. Attempt to steal, and it will vanish, leaving you to the depths. Elara nodded her understanding, and without hesitation, reached out and touched the shimmering sphere. The moment her fingers made contact, the water flowed over her, encasing her entire body in a thin, glowing film. To her astonishment, she could breathe effortlessly. the water somehow extracting air and feeding it to her lungs. The world around her sharpened, the underwater gloom transforming into a landscape of clear, brilliant detail. With the Nixies as her guides, she stepped off the rock and descended into the cool, silent embrace of the lake. The library's lost spires coming into view below, waiting to share their secrets. Descending into the Sunken Library was like stepping into a cathedral of silence and memory. The Nixies' aquatic gift allowed her to move with a strange, weightless grace. Her every breath, a soft whisper of bubbles within the glowing sphere that encased her. The library itself was breathtakingly preserved, its elegant, sweeping arches and pillared halls standing untouched by decay. The stonework, covered in a delicate lacework of phosphorescent algae and softly glowing pearls that provided an ethereal blue light. But this beauty was deceptive. The Nixies had not stayed with her. They had simply pointed toward the central scriptorium and melted back into the watery gloom, leaving her alone. This place was not merely abandoned. It was actively protected by the very magic that had preserved it, and her first challenge became immediately apparent as she tried to enter the main hall. The grand doorway was not blocked by debris, but by a shimmering, intricate web of swirling water currents that formed a constantly shifting pattern of runes and symbols. This was a hydrographic cipher lock, a magical security system where the key was not a physical object, but a specific sequence of sounds. The pressure of the water around her intensified, a clear warning that a wrong answer would result in the Nixies' gift failing, leaving her to the merciless depths. Elara focused on the lexicon in her hand, which now pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern, its light syncing with the ebb and flow of the aquatic runes. She realized the lock wasn't asking for a password, but for a rhythm, a specific cadence that matched the natural flow of this sacred place. Closing her eyes, she shut out the terrifying reality of her situation and listened. She heard the gentle hum of the water against stone, the distant, almost musical call of some deep water creature, and the soft, periodic plink of a droplet falling from the ceiling far above. That was at the droplet. She counted the seconds between each plink, finding a pattern of 3, then 5, then 2. Taking a steadying breath, she used the flat of her hand to tap against the stone wall beside her, replicating the sequence. 3 taps, a pause, 5 taps, a longer pause, 2 taps. The hydrographic web shimmered, the runes dissolved into harmless bubbles, and the path was clear. The central scriptorium was the heart of the library, a vast circular chamber with reading desks, carved from luminous coral, and shelves that held scrolls rolled in protective tubes of woven kelp and mother of pearl. But the most precious texts were not on the shelves. They were displayed on pedestals of white stone, each encased in a sphere of calm, still water, and each sphere was guarded by a complex magical trap. Her goal, the scroll that detailed the kingdom's history, rested on a central dais. Its casing, however, was particularly formidable, surrounded by a cloud of tiny, sharp shards of ice that orbited it at blinding speed, a glacial ward that would shred anything that touched it without the proper key. Approaching slowly, she saw that the pedestal was inscribed not with words, but with a series of musical staves. The ice shards themselves hummed with a faint, dissonant chord. This ward was keyed to harmony. To disable it, she would have to sing the counter melody that would cancel out the dissonance and allow her to pass. The lexicon glowed warmly in her hand, and when she focused her intent on it, it projected the musical notation, for the correct sequence of notes into her mind. The challenge was producing them. Her voice, distorted by the water and the air-giving sphere, would have to be perfect. She took a moment to still her nerves, feeling the weight of the entire lake above her. Then she began to sing. The notes were low and resonant, each one causing the orbiting ice shards to vibrate in response. As she sustained the final, pure note of the sequence, the dissonant hum of the ward ceased entirely. The ice shards lost their momentum, falling to the dais with a sound like scattering glass, and the protective sphere of water dissipated, leaving the scroll exposed. It was more beautiful than she could have imagined. The scroll itself was a masterwork. Instead of parchment, it was a continuous, flexible sheet of iridescent mother of pearl, and the text was not written in ink, but inscribed onto the surface with a precise laser-like tool, each character filled with a minuscule amount of bioluminescent algae that glowed with a soft green light. Unrolling it carefully, she saw that it was written in a flowing, aquatic script that used wave patterns and tidal markers as punctuation. The lexicon hummed against her palm, translating the complex symbols as her eyes moved over them. The scroll did not just recount the history of Lidhendor. It laid bare the profound consequences of its fall and the even greater stakes of its potential return. It described the kingdom not just as a place of power, but as a vital organ in the world's magical ecosystem. Its fall, the unsinging, had created a wound in reality, a slow leak of magical energy that had been subtly weakening the foundations of all magic for centuries. This was the true reason behind the Elders' fear and their decree to seal away all knowledge of it. They weren't just hiding a tragedy, they were trying to contain a metaphysical infection. But the scroll offered a terrifyingly hopeful prophecy. It stated that the kingdom's rediscovery and restoration would not simply plug this leak. It would cause a massive, instantaneous rebound of magical energy, a surge so powerful it would ripple across the entire world, reigniting dormant ley lines, awakening slumbering magical creatures, and potentially rewriting the very laws of arcane physics. This was the ultimate consequence. Finding Lidhendor wouldn't just be an archaeological triumph. It would trigger a second dawn of magic, a global event that would change everything forever. The responsibility of that knowledge settled on her shoulders like a physical weight, both exhilarating and utterly terrifying. She now held not just a history lesson, but a promise and a warning etched in light and pearl, a secret that would define the future of her entire world. The journey to the misty peaks was a stark contrast to the submerged silence of the lake. The air grew thin and cold, the path winding ever upward through jagged granite and swirling banks of perpetual fog that clung to the mountainside like a ghostly shroud. This was not a place one simply visited. It was a place one was invited to, and the invitation was written in a language of solitude and stone. The scroll from the Sunken Library had been clear. The third artifact, the Key of Truth, was not hidden in a vault or protected by a puzzle. It was kept by a person, the last speaker of a tongue so ancient that its very syllables were said to hold the texture of the world's first dawn. To even find this keeper, Alara would have to listen not with her ears, but with her entire being. The Lexicon, which had been her vibrant guide through the forest and the depths, fell strangely silent here, its light dimmed to a soft, steady pulse, as if in reverence. She understood. This was not a test of magical knowledge or clever decryption. It was a test of spirit. The clues on the scroll were not directions but principles. Seek the path of echoing silence. Offer the respect of an empty cup. Speak only when the mountain gives you its voice. For days, she wandered the high passes, her movements slow and deliberate, her mind open. She did not call out or search for signs of habitation. Instead, she sat for hours, watching the patterns of the mist as it flowed through the canyons, listening to the wind as it whistled through specific rock formations, creating notes that held a consistent, almost melodic structure. It was this observation that led her to him. She noticed that the wind's song changed subtly near a particular, almost invisible fissure in the rock face. Following the sound, she found not a cave, but a narrow entrance concealed by a masterfully crafted illusion of stone and shadow. And there, seated on a woven mat before a small fire, was an elf so ancient he seemed carved from the mountain itself. His eyes were closed, his face a landscape of deep lines, and from his lips came a soft, continuous stream of sound, not a song, not a chant, but a flowing, breathing conversation in a language that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. He was speaking to the fire, to the stone, to the very air, maintaining the existence of his language through the act of daily, sacred use. He was the last speaker, and his name, she would learn, was Thuron. Elara did not approach. She stopped a respectful distance away, knelt on the cold stone, and waited. She emptied her mind of her quest, her urgency, her desire for the key. She simply listened, allowing the rhythm and cadence of his solitary speech to wash over her. Hours passed. The fire dwindled. The sun began to set, painting the high peaks in shades of orange and violet. Only when the last speaker fell into a deep, natural silence did he open his eyes and look at her. His gaze was not hostile, but deeply assessing, as if he could see the weight of the Lexicon in her pack and the ghost of the Sunken Libraries glow in her eyes. He spoke a single word in the common tongue, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. Why, this was the moment. Any plea based on her need, any argument about the importance of her mission, would be a failure. It would be the language of taking, and this was a place of giving. She thought of the principles from the scroll. Offer the respect of an empty cup. She had to show him she understood the value of what he guarded, not as a means to an end, but as a priceless entity in itself. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, she began to speak. But she did not use the common tongue. Using every shred of knowledge she had absorbed from listening to him and from the Lexicon's most foundational files, she pieced together a greeting in his own dying language. The words were simple, halting, and undoubtedly accented, but they were spoken with utter sincerity. I hear the old song on the wind. I thank you for keeping its memory alive. Thuron's ancient eyes widened by a fraction. A lifetime of solitude had not prepared him for this. He responded in kind, his voice softening. You stumble over the stones of my words, child. Why trouble yourself with these difficult paths? Alara switched back to the common tongue, knowing her limited vocabulary could not carry the complexity of her feelings. Because a language is a world, she said, her voice filled with a passion that was entirely genuine. When a language dies, it's not just words that are lost. It's an entire way of seeing the universe. It's a unique melody that will never be sung again. I don't just want your key. I want to understand why it must be protected. I want to hear the story Only your words can tell. She saw the wall around him begin to crumble. He had spent centuries as a monument, a guardian. She was not treating him as a lock to be picked, but as a sage to be learned from. He gestured for her to sit by the renewed fire. Night fell completely, the stars blazing overhead in the thin, clear air. And there, in the flickering firelight, he began to teach her. He did not give her the key. He gave her his time. He shared fragments of stories, explained the deep connection between certain guttural sounds and the description of geological time, and how the word for truth in his language was the same as the word for unmoving mountain. Elara listened, utterly captivated. She asked questions not about Lidhendor or the keys, but about the language itself. She practiced the difficult pronunciations, laughing without embarrassment at her own mistakes. For 2 days, she lived with him in that high place, learning, sharing her own stories of the whispering woods and the lake, and in doing so, demonstrating the cultural empathy the scroll had implored. She showed him that she was not a thief of artifacts, but a preserver of meaning. On the morning of the 3rd day, Thuron fell silent after their shared breakfast. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment, then nodded to himself, as if confirming a decision made long ago. He rose and walked into the depths of his simple dwelling, returning with an object wrapped in soft, undyed wool. He unwrapped it carefully. It was not a key of metal or crystal, but a smooth, dark river stone, worn by time and water, into which was carved a single, perfect rune. The same rune he had taught her meant both truth and unmoving mountain. "This does not unlock a door," he said, his voice heavy with solemnity. "It unlocks understanding. It holds the true name of the one who betrayed Lidhendor, the name that was erased from all other records. To speak this name at the site of the betrayal, with the other 2 keys present, will not merely reveal a hidden city, child. It will force a reckoning with a truth that has festered for millennia. It will force the world to remember what it has chosen to forget. You have not taken this from me. You have earned the right to carry its weight." He placed the stone in her hand, and it felt immeasurably heavy, not with physical weight, but with the gravity of the final, unstoppable truth it contained. With the heavy stone of truth now in her possession, Alara felt the final piece of her quest click into place. She had the key of memory in the Lexicon, the key of harmony from the lake's history, and now the key of truth from the last speaker. The path to the hidden valley should have been clear. The final steps, a simple matter of following the map, burned into her mind, but Thuron did not bid her farewell. Instead, he rose, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked to the center of the small plateau outside his dwelling. The air, already thin and cold, seemed to grow still and heavy with intention. He turned to face her, his ancient eyes holding a gravity that made the mountain itself feel like a silent witness. "The artifacts you carry are not trophies to be collected," he stated, his voice no longer that of a teacher, but of a judge. "They are responsibilities to be shouldered. You have proven you can find them. You have proven you can learn, but can you understand the weight of the choice they represent? The language of this choice is not written in any scroll. It is written in the soul, and so we will speak it." He proposed a duel not of blades or magic, but of tongues, a contest of fluency in the most archaic and nuanced dialects of the Elder Elves, the very languages in which the original prophecy of Lidhendor's fall was first uttered. This would not be a test of memorization, but of true comprehension, where a single misplaced inflection could alter the entire meaning of a phrase and reveal the heart of the speaker. The duel began not with a shouted challenge, but with a softly spoken couplet from a creation myth in a dialect so old it predated written history. Thuron's voice wove the words together, each syllable layered with multiple meanings, describing the first sunrise as both a moment of incredible beauty and profound sorrow for the departing night. Elara's response had to match not just the meaning, but the emotional resonance. She drew upon everything she had learned in the Sunken Library, responding with a verse from a corresponding elegy for the moon, her voice carefully balancing the tones of loss and hope, mirroring his complex emotional landscape. Back and forth they went, their voices the only sound on the high peak, weaving a tapestry of ancient stories, legal arguments from fallen courts, and poetic metaphors for love and betrayal. The final round was the most difficult. Thuron did not speak a full sentence. He uttered a single, multifaceted word from the dialect of the royal archivists of Lidhendor itself. The word Astar-Nin could, based on the subtle emphasis on the second syllable and the almost imperceptible questioning lilt at the end, be translated as my trusted one, my betrayer, or even the one I must now judge. Its meaning was entirely dependent on context and intent. Alara closed her eyes, reaching past the academic definitions in her mind. She thought of the kingdom's story, of the pain of the betrayal, and the hope for restoration. She saw the word not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a heart to be understood. When she opened her eyes, her response was not a translation, but a mirror. She repeated the word back to him with the exact same pronunciation, but she infused it with a tone of profound grief and unwavering resolve. In that moment, she was not defining the word, she was feeling it, accepting the entire tragic history it contained. Thuron was silent for a long time, the wind whipping around them. A look of deep respect and something akin to sorrow settled on his face. She had passed his test perfectly. But instead of congratulating her, he delivered the true challenge. You have the keys, you have the path, you have the right, but the final act is not one of power. It is one of choice. He explained that the three keys, when brought together at the site of the great betrayal, would not automatically restore the kingdom. They would present the bearer with a clear, terrible ultimatum. She could use them to fully awaken Lidhendor, pulling it back into the world and unleashing the prophesied surge of magic that would rewrite reality. Or she could use them to perform the final, sacred rite of sealing, ensuring the kingdom and its painful truth remained buried forever, its wound on the world contained but never healed. The weight of the stone in her hand suddenly felt immense. This was the moral choice he spoke of. Awakening the kingdom meant unleashing an unpredictable torrent of magic upon the world, a force that could heal and create, but also disrupt and destroy on a global scale. It would force every living being to confront a past they had forgotten, and a power they might not be ready to handle. Leaving it buried meant condemning the world to a continued, slow decline of magic, choosing a known, stable stagnation over an unknown and potentially chaotic renaissance. It meant allowing a great truth to remain hidden and a great injustice to go unaddressed, all for the sake of peace. Thuron's duty was now complete. He had given her the key and the choice. The path down the mountain was hers to walk alone, every step heavy with the knowledge that her decision at the journey's end would irrevocably change everything. Alone on the mountain path, with the 3 keys finally in her possession, Alara found a moment of stillness, the Lexicon's warm pulse against her chest, the cool weight of the Sunken Library's history in her pack, and the smooth, heavy stone of truth in her palm felt less like separate artifacts and more like 3 parts of a single, sleeping entity. Following an instinct deeper than conscious thought, she brought them together, holding the lexicon and the stone in one hand and placing the mother of pearl scroll beside them on a flat rock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low, resonant hum began to emanate from the trio, a sound that seemed to vibrate not through the air, but through the fabric of reality itself. The lexicon was the first to respond, its crystalline form flaring with a light so intense it cast no shadows, instead illuminating the surroundings with a pure, white radiance. The runes on its facets didn't just glow, they detached, swirling around the artifact like a miniature galaxy of golden symbols. Simultaneously, the melodic stone in her hand grew warm, and the single rune carved into its surface began to emit a clear, pure tone, a single sustained note that held within it the echoes of countless voices, countless truths. The scroll, reacting to the energy, levitated slightly, its bioluminescent text flaring as the wave pattern punctuation began to physically undulate, the mother of pearl surface rippling like a tranquil pool touched by a stone. The 3 energies, light, sound, and liquid motion, swirled together above the rock, intertwining and building into a harmonic convergence. The hum rose in pitch, the light brightened, and the swirling runes from the lexicon began to align with the flowing script of the scroll, guided by the unwavering tone of the stone. They weren't just combining, they were communicating, their unique languages merging into a single, coherent message. The air in front of Alara shimmered, not with heat, but with a strange bending of light and perspective. The projected image of the valley map from the lexicon returned, but it was no longer static. It was alive, the shimmering cartograph folded in on itself, the mountains and forests twisting and realigning into a complex, 4-dimensional model. This was no simple longitude and latitude. The coordinates revealed were not points on a flat map, but a set of instructions written in the language of reality itself. The model showed a specific, nondescript canyon in the northern ranges, a place known for its strange acoustics, where echoes sometimes returned before the sound that made them was finished. But the map indicated that the true entrance was not the canyon itself, but a point in the empty air above its center, a specific confluence of sonic and magical frequencies that had to be achieved simultaneously. The key wasn't a door to be found, but a chord to be sung, a precise combination of the lexicon's foundational phonemes, the scroll's tidal rhythm, and the stone's pure tone of truth. To open the way, she would have to become the instrument, using the 3 artifacts not as keys to turn in a lock, but as tuning forks to resonate with a hidden layer of the world. The dimensional fold wasn't a physical place one could walk to. It was a state of reality one had to harmonize with, a secret frequency that had been silenced for centuries, waiting for the one who could remember its song and sing it back into existence. The merged artifacts had given her the musical score. Now, she had to find the courage to perform it, knowing that a single misstep in this symphony of magic would mean not just failure, but potentially being lost between the folds of the world forever. The moment she sang the final, perfect note of the convergence chord, the world didn't just change, it dissolved. The solid granite of the canyon floor vanished beneath her feet. The sky above unraveled into streaks of swirling color, and the very air was pulled from her lungs, not by force, but by the sudden absence of the physics that governed it. Elara was no longer standing in a place, but falling through a concept, tumbling through a realm where time wasn't a river, but a tangled knot of moments, and language wasn't a tool, but a physical, malleable substance. She could feel the weight of her own words as potential objects forming in her mind, and she instinctively knew that speaking carelessly here could literally shape the unstable reality around her in dangerous, unpredictable ways. She landed not on ground, but on a surface that felt like solidified sound, a floor that vibrated with a low, melodic hum. The world that resolved around her was a breathtaking and terrifying paradox. The landscape was built from echoes of conversations that had never been finished, from half-remembered stories and forgotten promises, all given semi-solid form. Towers of whispered secrets spiraled upward, rivers of half-sung lullabies flowed between them, and the air itself shimmered with the ghosts of unspoken words. This was the fold, the buffer zone between the lost kingdom and the real world, and its guardians were as fluid and unstable as the realm itself. They came not from the shadows, but from the echoes. Figures coalesced from the reverberations of her own panicked breath, their forms shifting and indistinct, mirroring her own shape for a moment before flowing into something entirely other. These were the echo beings, creatures of pure linguistic resonance, and they did not communicate with words or gestures. They communicated with the very essence of meaning itself, projecting waves of pure intent, emotion, and conceptual weight directly into her consciousness. Their first question wasn't a sentence. It was a crushing wave of profound, ancient sorrow mixed with a razor-sharp edge of suspicion. It was the accumulated grief of a millennia of silence, and it demanded to know why she, an outsider, had come to disturb it. Elara's instinct was to cry out, to explain herself with words, but she clamped down on that impulse. Speaking her native tongue here would be like throwing a rock into a still pond. The ripples would distort everything. Instead, she had to answer in their language. She closed her eyes, shutting out the dizzying visuals, and focused inward on the feeling they had projected. She acknowledged the sorrow, letting it wash over her without resistance, and then she carefully, deliberately, fashioned a response from the same emotional material. She pulled from her own memory the deepest sadness she had ever felt, the loneliness of her studies, the fear of failure, the weight of her responsibility, and she blended it with a single, powerful strand of unwavering hope, the hope she had felt when the Lexicon first glowed in her hands. She didn't send words, she sent this crafted package of pure feeling back toward the beings, a silent offering of understanding. The wave of sorrow receded, replaced by a pulse of cool, analytical curiosity. It felt like being scanned by a beam of intellectual light. A new concept formed in her mind, this one complex and layered, a philosophical inquiry about the nature of truth versus history. Was a forgotten truth still true? Did a kingdom that no one remembered still have a right to exist? Or was its continued absence the only peace it could offer the world? This was the core of the test. They weren't just testing her knowledge, they were testing the moral and philosophical foundation of her entire quest. A simple yes or no would be meaningless here. She had to build her answer from the fabric of the realm itself. She reached out with her mind, not toward the beings, but toward the environment. She gently gathered the whispers from a nearby tower, the echoes of a long-dead elf's argument about justice. She wove these together with the steady, rhythmic flow of the lullaby river, a universal symbol of comfort and continuity. Into this tapestry, she threaded the unshakable certainty of the truth stone in her hand, its resonant frequency, a bedrock of reality. Her answer was a multi-sensory construct, the concept of justice, supported by the rhythm of life, all anchored by an immutable truth. She showed them that a forgotten truth is a wound on the world's soul, and that while remembrance can be painful, it is the only path to true healing. A profound silence fell over the fold, deeper than any she had ever experienced. The shifting, chaotic realm seemed to hold its breath. Then, the echo beings did something unexpected. Their forms, usually so fluid, solidified into shapes of breathtaking elegance, resembling elves but made of shimmering, harmonious sound. They bowed to her, a gesture of deep respect that she felt as a warm, approving resonance in her heart. The path before her, which had been a chaotic jumble of fractured time and broken sentences, smoothed and solidified into a bridge of pure, white light, leading toward a distant archway that pulsed with a familiar, golden energy. They had not just allowed her to pass, they had affirmed that her purpose was just, and her understanding was complete. The way to the heart of the lost kingdom was now open, but the final and most difficult test still lay ahead. The bridge of light carried Alara not across space, but through the final layers of silence, separating her from the kingdom's core. The chaotic beauty of the fold smoothed and stilled, the whispering towers and melodic rivers fading into a profound, expectant hush. She found herself standing in a vast, circular chamber that felt both immense and intimately enclosed. There were no walls in the conventional sense. The boundaries of the room were made of solidified, swirling starlight, and the floor was a seamless surface of dark, polished obsidian that reflected the cosmos above. At the chamber's very center, hovering just above the ground, was the heart of Lidhendor. It was not a throne, not a treasure vault, but something far more magnificent, a dormant prophecy etched in living light. It hung in the air, a complex, three-dimensional tapestry of interconnected elven runes and musical notations, each character pulsing with a soft, golden luminescence. This was the Song of Awakening, the final, locked testament of the kingdom. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but it was also terrifyingly fragile. Elara could feel its potential power, a low hum that vibrated in her bones, but she could also sense its profound instability. This was not text to be read, it was a composition to be performed. A single misstep, a single syllable spoken with the wrong emotional intent, or a note sung with incorrect inflection, wouldn't just fail to activate it. The delicate balance of light and meaning would collapse, and the prophecy would unravel into nothingness, erased from existence forever. The echo beings had brought her to the threshold, but they could not cross it with her. This was a solo performance, and the audience was history itself. She approached slowly, the three artifacts in her possession beginning to resonate in harmony with the hovering prophecy. The Lexicon glowed, offering up the pure phonetic pronunciation of each ancient word. The history scroll shimmered, providing the contextual emotional weight and the rhythmic cadence behind each phrase. The truth stone in her palm emitted its clear, steady tone, the foundational pitch upon which this entire symphony would be built. The information was all there, a complete score laid out before her mind's eye. But knowing the notes was not the same as singing the song. The true challenge was internal. She had to become a perfect vessel, emptying herself of all her own fear, her doubt, her desire, and even her hope. To channel the prophecy purely, she could not impose her own will upon it. She had to disappear into its truth, allowing the language to use her voice as its instrument. Taking a final, centering breath, Alara closed her eyes. She let the visuals fade away and focused only on the resonant frequency of the truth stone, using it as her tuning note. Then she began. The first word was not a word at all, but a soft, open vowel sound that hung in the air like a drop of dew. It was the sound of beginning, of potential. As she sustained it, a corresponding strand of light in the prophecy brightened, solidifying. The next phoneme was a complex consonant cluster that required her to place her tongue in a specific position against her teeth, while modulating the airflow from her diaphragm to create a soft, buzzing resonance. It was the linguistic equivalent of a key turning in a lock. She felt the lexicon's guidance like a physical pressure in her mouth, shaping each sound with impossible precision. The prophecy began to unfold as she gave it voice, the glowing runes flowing in a beautiful, predetermined pattern around her. But halfway through the second stanza, she felt it, a sudden, invasive pressure at the edge of her perception. A shadow of harsh, discordant intent. Kalin had found his way in. He stood at the chamber's entrance, his face a mask of furious ambition. He didn't understand the nuance, the respect required. He saw only a source of power to be seized. "Stop," he commanded, his voice a harsh crack in the sacred silence. "You're doing it wrong. Let someone with real power handle this." He began to shout the words of the prophecy, but in the common tongue, with brute force and no feeling, no understanding of the delicate sonic architecture he was trying to bulldoze. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The beautiful, flowing lines of light shuddered. Where Kalin's harsh sounds touched them, they blackened and frayed, like threads in a tapestry being pulled apart. The chamber itself recoiled, the starlight walls dimming. Elara faltered for a heartbeat, the perfect flow of her performance broken by the shock of his intrusion. A rune she was about to vocalize flickered dangerously. In that split second, she faced a choice: try to block him out and continue, or break her own connection to address the threat directly. Both options risked annihilation. If she ignored him, his continuing discord would destroy the prophecy around her. If she stopped to confront him, the fragile vocal thread she maintained would snap. The entire fate of Lidhendor hinged on her next action, a decision that had to be made not from thought, but from instinct. Her decision was not a thought, but a reflex, a perfect alignment of instinct and training. To stop would be to fail. To engage with Kalin would be to surrender the song to his discord. There was only one path forward. Alara closed her eyes tighter, shutting out his shouting, and dove deeper into the music of the prophecy. She did not fight against the harsh noise he was creating. Instead, she wove it into the song. She took the jagged, angry edge of his voice and used it, transforming his interference from a destructive force into a new, unexpected instrument in the orchestra. She modulated her own voice, softening its tone to provide a calm, steady counterpoint to his chaos, her syllables becoming a gentle river flowing around a sharp, obstinate rock. The prophecy, which had begun to fray, stabilized the blackened threads of light, mending under the guidance of her adaptive harmony. She poured every ounce of her being into the final stanzas, her voice rising and falling with the intricate emotional landscape of the text, now a whisper of profound grief for the kingdom's fall, now a crescendo of unwavering hope for its return. The lexicon glowed white-hot in her hand, the scroll's light flared, and the truth stone's tone became the unwavering foundation upon which the entire performance rested. As she sang the very last syllable, a word that meant both beginning and return, the effect was instantaneous. A wave of pure, golden energy erupted from the center of the prophecy, not as a destructive blast, but as a gentle, expanding sphere of light and sound. It passed through Alara like a warm breeze, and it washed over Kalin, not harming him, but silencing him utterly. His shouts were caught in his throat, his ambition momentarily stunned into awe by the sheer magnitude of the magic he had tried to corrupt. The chamber of starlight dissolved around them, the obsidian floor, the swirling cosmic walls. It all faded into a blinding, beautiful gold. When the light receded, Elara was no longer in an otherworldly fold of reality. She was standing on soft, lush grass under a twilight sky where two moons hung, one silver, one gold. The air was sweet and warm, filled with the scent of night-blooming flowers and the distant, melodic chiming of crystal wind catchers. She was surrounded by elegant, graceful spires that seemed grown from living wood and woven moonlight, their curves organic and impossibly beautiful. This was Lidhendor. It was not a ruin. It was perfectly, miraculously preserved, as if the entire kingdom had been held in a single, captured breath for 1,000 years, waiting for this exact moment to exhale and live again. And standing before her, at the edge of a plaza of pearlescent stone, was its sole guardian. It was not an elf, nor a spirit, but an automaton of breathtaking craftsmanship. It stood twice her height, its form assembled from interlocking plates of polished, gold-veined white stone and polished bronze that gleamed in the dual moonlight. Its face was a smooth, elegant mask, devoid of features except for two deep recesses where its eyes should be, from which shone a soft, blue light that swept over her like a gentle scan. It moved with a silent, fluid grace that belied its stone construction, stepping forward to meet her. This was the Sentinel of Lidhendor, the last ward of a lost kingdom, and it had been waiting for a very, very long time. It raised one articulated hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of formal greeting, and when it spoke, its voice was the sound of wind through crystal chimes and stone grinding deep within the earth, a voice both ancient and utterly serene. The automaton's voice was a symphony of grinding stone and chiming crystal, beautiful and utterly alien. The words it spoke were not from any dialect Alara had ever studied. This was the primal command tongue of Lidhendor's creators, a language so fundamental it was used to instruct the very foundations of reality. Each syllable was a complex instruction, layered with meaning and intent, and the Sentinel was not asking a question. It was issuing a sequence of authentication protocols. It was the final lock on the kingdom's heart, and the key was not a physical object, but a linguistic one. Alara had mere seconds to interpret the syntax and respond correctly, or the Sentinel's programming would recognize her as an intruder and initiate the emergency sealing protocol, plunging Lidhendor back into its dimensional fold, perhaps forever. Her mind raced, the lexicon in her hand, burning with urgency. It was trying to help, its facets flashing with possible translations, but this language was too pure, too direct. It wasn't meant for translation, it was meant for execution. The automaton's first phrase, Astar nin Alata Varen, was a compound command. Astar nin, she knew from Thuron, a word of profound ambiguity meaning both my trusted one and my betrayer. Alata was a foundational verb, its meaning shifting based on the speaker's emotional resonance. It could mean to open, to awaken, or to judge. Varen was the object, the heart, or the core. The Sentinel wasn't just asking for a password, it was reading her soul through her pronunciation. A response spoken with fear would mean, judge the heart of the betrayer, triggering a defensive reaction. A response spoken with confidence and clarity would mean, awaken the heart of my trusted one. She drew a steadying breath, pushing aside the panic, and focused on the truth stone's unwavering frequency in her other hand. She had to answer not with a translation, but with a reflection. She mirrored the automaton's phrase exactly, Astar nin Alata Varen, but she poured into it the entire emotional journey that had brought her here. The respect for the Joatha, the empathy for the Nixies, the reverence for Thuron's wisdom, and the pure, selfless desire to heal rather than to claim. Her voice did not waver. It rang out clear and true, harmonizing with the stone and crystal chime of the Sentinel's own words. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The automaton stood perfectly still, its blue ocular lights fixed on her. Then it gave a single, slow nod. The first lock had been disengaged, but the authentication was a multi-layered process. It began speaking again, this time a rapid series of commands that were like a cascading musical scale of nouns and verbs, a list of systems to be brought online and stabilized. This was the real test. She had to not just understand, but perform. She had to speak the language back to it, issuing the confirmations in the correct sequence and rhythm, becoming a co-administrator of the kingdom's awakening. She was so deeply focused, her entire being channeling the flow of ancient code, that she didn't hear the rushed footsteps behind her until it was too late. Kalin, recovered from his stunned silence and driven by a furious hunger, saw not a sacred dialogue, but a console to be hijacked. He didn't try to understand the language, he tried to overwhelm it. I am the master here, he shouted in the common tongue, his voice a harsh, discordant scream that shattered the delicate sonic field Elara was maintaining. This power is mine to command. Stand down. The effect on the Sentinel was immediate and catastrophic. The gentle blue light in its eyes flickered and turned a hostile, blazing red. Kalin's forceful, arrogant command was the worst possible input. The automaton interpreted it as a direct assault from a hostile entity. Its programming overrode the delicate authentication process with Alara. A deep, resonant alarm began to pulse through the plaza, not as a sound, but as a vibration that shook the very grass under their feet. The beautiful spires around them began to flicker, their solid forms becoming momentarily translucent. The Sentinel raised its massive stone hands, not in greeting, but in a defensive posture, and it began to intone the first phrases of the emergency sealing protocol, a countdown to oblivion. Elara's heart sank. They were seconds from losing everything. Kalin, realizing his mistake but too proud to retreat, fumbled for a weapon, his face a mask of rage and desperation. Alara knew fighting was pointless. The only way to stop this was to speak, to cut through the alarm with a command so pure, so authoritative, that it would reset the system. She had to use the language not as a key, but as a shield. She stepped directly between the automaton and Kalin, her arms spread wide, and she shouted a single, primal word from the Lexicon's deepest core. It was not a word of power, but a word of cessation, of absolute silence. Luth, the sound hit the air and flattened it. The alarm vibration ceased. The Sentinel froze, its glowing red eyes fixed on her. In that perfect, ringing silence, she didn't look at Kalin. She looked only at the Guardian of Lidhendor, and she spoke the truth, not in the command tongue, but in the common language, knowing the Sentinel would understand the intent behind the words. This man acts from fear and ignorance. I act for healing. Do not let his failure become our own. The kingdom has waited millennia for this dawn. Let it rise. The automaton head tilted. The red light in its eyes softened, flickered, and then faded back to a calm, questioning blue. It was waiting. The countdown had been paused, but the sealing protocol was still active in its memory. The choice was still hers. She had to complete the authentication, but now she had to do it, while also neutralizing the threat Kalin posed, using the only weapon she had ever needed her understanding. She turned to face her rival, not with anger, but with a devastating pity. You still don't understand, do you, Kalin? This was never about power. It was always about conversation. And you have never learned how to listen. Kalin's eyes, wide with a volatile mix of desperation and greed, darted from the towering automaton to the pulsating core of the kingdom behind it. He saw not a civilization to be restored, but a power source to be dominated. Ignoring the complex emotional and linguistic fields Alara had so carefully navigated, he raised his own hands, a crude imitation of command, and began shouting words he'd only ever read in dusty, misunderstood texts. Aneralanta, Naitaruvantes, he bellowed, mangling the ancient phonetics into harsh, guttural demands. He intended to say, "The sun rises, may they guard it." A phrase of blessing, but his brutal pronunciation and aggressive tone twisted the meaning into a declaration of conquest, a call for subjugation. The Sentinel's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The serene blue light in its ocular cavities flared into a violent, bloody crimson. A deep, resonant hum, like a mountain grinding against itself, erupted from its stone form. The plaza, which had been thrumming with the gentle energy of awakening, now vibrated with a hostile, defensive frequency. The automaton's articulated hands, once raised in peaceful greeting, now clenched into massive stone fists. It took a single, ground-shaking step toward Kalin, its voice no longer a chime, but the sound of shattering crystal and fracturing earth. Renewal. It intoned, hostile entity detected, and began a low, rhythmic countdown in that primal command tongue. Minqueata knelled. Each number was a hammer blow against the fragile piece, a seal on the kingdom's tomb. Elara's mind, honed by countless hours of study and recent trials, didn't panic. It analyzed. She heard the specific verbs the Sentinel used Uladar for hostile, Harna for to judge, Nak for to repel. This wasn't just a security system, it was a judicial one, following a strict legalistic protocol. To stop it, she couldn't just shout, "Stop." She had to present a formal counter-argument in the correct linguistic and syntactic format. She had to prove Kalin's nullification, not through force, but through flawless eloquence. She stepped forward, placing herself directly in the line of sight between the automaton and her cowering rival. She did not shout. She spoke with a calm, resonant authority that cut through the alarm like a knife. "La she declared, not hostile, but she immediately followed it with the critical grammatical modifier the protocol required, "Essa umavena." He is without true perception. She wasn't just denying the charge, she was reclassifying the offender from a malicious attacker to an ignorant fool, a crucial distinction in the kingdom's ancient codes of law. The countdown hesitated on Lempa 5. The red light in the Sentinel's eyes flickered, processing her linguistic intervention. Seizing the opening, Alara didn't pause. She began a rapid, formal recitation, drawing upon the deepest legal precedents stored within the Lexicon's memory. She cited the case of Aenil the Unaware, a historical instance where a similar breach was forgiven due to a lack of malicious intent, her words flowing in the precise, rhythmic cadence of a courtroom advocate. "Semenya nai norima heru," she stated, her voice unwavering. "My judgment is the rightful lord." She was invoking her own hard-won authority as the one who had passed the Echo Being's test and sung the prophecy to life. Kalin, seeing her success as his final chance to seize control, made a last, desperate lunge not at the automaton, but at the truth stone still clutched in Alara's hand. His movement was sudden and violent, a physical assault that shattered the delicate diplomatic field she had created. The Sentinel's programming instantly recalibrated. A physical threat to the keybearer overrode all other judicial considerations. Its countdown ceased, and it shifted into a new, far more dangerous mode. Its stone hands came together with a sound like a cliff, collapsing, and a visible wave of concussive sonic energy, a weaponized word of pure negation, began to build in the air between them, aimed directly at Kalin. This wasn't a seal, it was an erasure. There was no time for eloquent argument. There was only time for action. Alara made a choice that defied all logic of self-preservation. She didn't try to protect herself or the stone. Instead, she moved toward the blast, shouting a single, primal syllable of protection, "Varia," to protect. But she directed the intent not at herself, but at Kalin. She interposed her own body and her will between the automaton's wrath and the man who had tried to destroy everything. It was a plea not based on law, but on mercy, a concept far more complex and dangerous to codify. The wave of force hit her, and for a moment, her entire being was pure, blinding light and sound. She felt the automaton's judgment scour through her, reading her intent down to its absolute core. It saw her selfless act, her genuine desire to protect even the one who sought to harm her and this place. The violent energy didn't vanish. It was reabsorbed, transformed. The crimson light faded from the Sentinel's eyes, cooling first to a soft violet, then settling back into its original, serene blue. It lowered its hands. The judicial protocol was complete. It had delivered its verdict not on Kalin, but on Alara, and she had been found worthy of grace. Silence returned to the plaza, deeper and more profound than before. Kalin lay unconscious on the grass, not from any blow, but from the sheer psychic recoil of the averted violence. The Sentinel looked down at Alara, who stood shaken but unharmed. It spoke again, its voice once more the gentle chime of crystal and stone. Harialia na nostale, it said. Thy protection is wisdom. The Guardian then took a step back, and then another, returning to its post at the edge of the pearlescent plaza. Its watchfulness remained, but the immediate threat was over. The kingdom was secure, and its fate now rested entirely in the hands of the one who had proven she would defend its peace, even from itself. The air crackled with the automaton's building fury, a sonic doom aimed at Kalin's heart. There was no time for a legal argument, no space for a reasoned plea. Elara's mind, honed by a lifetime of linguistic study, did not search for a word of power, but for a word of peace. The lexicon in her hand offered up a fragment of a forgotten lullaby, a pacification verse from the High Elvish tradition, used by master healers to soothe magical creatures in the throes of a destructive rage. It was a sequence of soft, open vowel sounds and gentle sibilants, a vocal pattern designed to mimic the rhythm of a calm heartbeat and the sigh of a resting wind. She drew a single, steadying breath, and she began to sing. Her voice was not loud, but it was impossibly clear, cutting through the hostile frequency like a shaft of moonlight through a storm. The verse was a tapestry of gentle admonishments and assurances. La Senin Koitas, her Yayuma, she sang, the words flowing like water over stone. I see no enemy here, only a lost spirit. Leda Ioman Tilva, Avake, remember our shared beginning. Do not speak this violence. Each syllable was perfectly placed, each note sustained with a warmth that sought to cool the automaton's wrath. She wasn't commanding it to stop. She was inviting it to remember its true purpose, to recall the serenity of the kingdom it was built to guard, not to destroy. The effect was not instantaneous, but it was profound. The wave of concussive force wavered, the bloody red light in the Sentinel's eyes flickering like a guttering candle. The grinding stone hum of its aggression softened, interwoven now with the faint, returning chime of its true nature. It was a battle of frequencies, and Alara's pacifying verse was steadily overwhelming the hostile programming. The automaton's massive stone fists unclenched, the energy around them dissipating harmlessly into the twilight air. The judicial protocol, having found a resolution in mercy, was satisfied. The Sentinel stood down, its form settling back into its watchful posture, its ocular lights now a calm, steady blue. The immediate threat was over, but the kingdom's equilibrium had been deeply disturbed. The act of weaponizing language, even in defense, and the subsequent forceful pacification required to stop it, sent a violent ripple through the delicate dimensional fold that held Lidhendor in place. The ground beneath their feet didn't shake, it shimmered. The elegant spires of living wood and moonlight flickered, their forms becoming momentarily translucent, revealing the chaotic, swirling energies of the fold beyond. A low, dissonant hum vibrated through the very air, a sound of structural stress, as if the beautiful illusion of this place was a photograph laid over a raging river, and the water was beginning to show through. The Sentinel, now fully returned to its guardian state, processed this new instability. Its programming had a clear directive for such a scenario: To preserve the kingdom's integrity, any destabilizing element must be removed. It turned its gaze upon Kalin, who lay dazed and defeated on the grass. There would be no second chance, no opportunity for redemption within these borders. The automaton raised a hand, not in aggression, but in dismissal. It spoke a single word of exile, a term of such finality in the old tongue that it seemed to carve a void in the air around her rival. Adelaida, it intoned, "Thou art departed." A portal, not of light but of unraveling reality, opened beside Kalin. It was a tear in the fabric of the world, showing a dizzying glimpse of a misty mountain pass, the very place where Alara's journey had truly begun. Before he could even cry out, the unseen forces of the fold gathered him up and pushed him through the opening, which sealed behind him with a sound like a sigh of relief, leaving no trace he had ever been there. He was gone, exiled not to a place of punishment, but simply to a world that was no longer ready for the truth he carried. The stability of the plaza returned, the humming faded, and the spires solidified once more. But the cost was now apparent. The act of exiling a living soul, of forcibly ejecting mass and consciousness from the fold, had required a tremendous expenditure of the kingdom's foundational energy. The two moons in the sky, which had been shining with a brilliant, steady light, now seemed slightly dimmer. The sweet, warm air carried a new, faint chill. Lidhendor was safe, but it was wounded, its glorious return now tempered by a new fragility. The perfect dawn she had fought for was now a twilight holding its breath, and Alara understood that her work was not finished. It had only just begun, under a sky that felt a little less certain than before. The ground beneath Alara's feet no longer felt solid. It shimmered with a sickly, unstable light, and the beautiful spires of Lidhendor began to fade like a drawing on mist, their details blurring into the chaotic swirl of the fold. The air itself grew thin, the melodic chiming of the wind catchers distorting into a dissonant, desperate wail. The kingdom was unraveling, its existence fraying at the edges, and the Sentinel could only watch, its programming incapable of halting this deeper, foundational collapse. The energy required to exile Kalin and pacify his violence had been the final strain on a system already stretched to its limit by millennia of silence. Lidhendor was dying not from an attack, but from exhaustion, and the only thing that could possibly save it was the very source of its original power, the final, unspoken verse of the prophecy itself. This was the choice the last speaker had warned her about, the moral crossroads that lay beyond simply finding the kingdom. The lexicon in her hand burned, not with heat, but with urgent knowledge, projecting the final lines of the song of awakening directly into her mind. But these were not instructions for revival. They were a key to a permanent and profound transformation. To speak this verse was not to simply restore Lidhendor as it was. It was to complete the interrupted ritual from 1,000 years ago, to finally unleash the full, pent-up surge of magical energy that the kingdom's fall had prevented. It would be a second dawn of magic, a reboot of the world's arcane systems. The ley lines would flare back to life, dormant magical creatures would awaken, and the very rules of reality would shift to accommodate this new, overflowing power. Elven history, as every scholar knew it, would be instantly and irrevocably rewritten. The so-called Age of Diminishment would be revealed as a long, slow leak, and its end would be marked by a sudden, glorious, and terrifying flood. The alternative was to remain silent, to let the verse die on her lips, to watch the shimmering towers dissolve completely back into the fold, to allow the whispers of its people to fade into eternal silence. This path offered safety, a known quantity. The world would continue on its current, stable trajectory. Magic would remain a rare and fading art, a thing of subtle charms and forgotten lore. The painful, complicated truth of Lidhendor's betrayal would remain a secret, and the delicate political and social structures of the Elven realms would remain undisturbed. It was the choice of preservation, of avoiding the chaos of the unknown, but it was also a choice of profound loss. It was the deliberate extinguishing of a light that had waited 1,000 years to shine again. It was accepting a world that was less than it could be, forever. Alara's mind raced, not with academic theories, but with visceral, terrifying images. She pictured the surge hitting her own city, the panic in the streets as simple household enchantments suddenly flared with uncontrollable power, as children discovered abilities that hadn't been seen in centuries. She imagined the confusion among the elders, their carefully maintained control over knowledge and magic shattered in an instant. This wouldn't be a gentle transition. It would be a revolution, and revolutions are messy and often violent. Could the world handle such a sudden awakening, or would this gift become a curse, a new source of conflict and fear? But then she looked at the Sentinel, its head tilted not in judgment, but in what looked like a silent, patient question. She saw the fading beauty of the plaza, the ghostly echoes of elves who had lived and loved and created wonders here. She thought of the Joatha in the woods, the Nixies in the lake, and Thuron on his mountain, all guardians of fading truths. This wasn't just about power, it was about truth. Letting Lidhendor vanish would be the final act of the great betrayal, the ultimate victory for the one who had sought to silence this kingdom forever. It would be agreeing that some truths are too dangerous to be known, that some songs are too powerful to be sung. It would mean that fear, in the end, was wiser than hope. There was no more time for weighing consequences. The world around her was becoming translucent, the grass under her feet insubstantial. She could see the chaotic storms of the fold, swirling where the pearlescent stones of the plaza had been. It was now or never. Alara closed her eyes, shutting out the terrifying vision of the unraveling world. She found her center not in courage, but in conviction. She thought not of the chaos to come, but of the silence that would remain. She found the final verse within herself, a sequence of sounds that felt less like words and more like the fundamental notes of creation itself. And with a voice that rang out clear and sure across the dissolving kingdom, she chose not safety, but song. She sang the last words, and in that moment, she accepted the beautiful, terrifying responsibility of becoming the midwife to a new world. The final, resonant note of the prophecy hung in the air, not as a sound, but as a palpable force, a wave of pure potential that washed over the shimmering form of Lidhendor. For a heart-stopping moment, the kingdom's flickering intensified, the beautiful spires and pearlescent plazas threatening to dissolve back into the chaos of the fold. Elara stood at the epicenter, her arms outstretched, feeling the immense torrent of energy flow through her. She was no longer just a singer of the song. She had become its conductor, its anchor in the real world. The Lexicon, the scroll, and the truth stone burned with a cool, harmonious light in her hands. their three distinct powers finally weaving together into a single, stabilizing thread. She focused every ounce of her will, not on controlling the surge, but on guiding it, on envisioning the kingdom not as a memory, but as a living, breathing reality. She poured into that vision all the reverence she had learned from the Joatha, the respect she had bartered with the Nixies, and the profound understanding she had gained from Thuron. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the violent shimmering subsided. The chaotic hum of unraveling reality softened, replaced by the steady, melodic chime of the wind catchers and the gentle rustle of leaves on the living wood spires. The two moons in the twilight sky shone with a renewed, permanent light. Lidhendor was real, it was stable, it was home. The Sentinel, which had stood as a silent, watchful statue throughout the cataclysm, now moved. It approached Elara and knelt on one knee, its stone form settling with a sound of finality. It did not speak, but a wave of pure acknowledgement and fealty washed over her, a feeling of profound gratitude and transfer of custodianship. The guardianship of Lidhendor, held for a millennium by automated protocol, now passed to a living heart. Alara was no longer an archaeologist or a linguist. She was the guardian of the Twilight Realm, the keeper of the unsung song. The weight of that title settled upon her, not as a burden, but as a purpose that filled every part of her being. Her first act as guardian was not one of power, but of compassion. She walked to the center of the plaza, placed her hands upon the cool grass, and sent a pulse of welcoming energy through the ley lines of the kingdom, an invitation to the echoes of its people, assuring them that their long vigil was over and their story would now continue. Returning to her own people was a journey that felt both instantaneous and lasted a lifetime. She emerged from the northern canyons not with an army or a treasure chest, but with a single, intricately carved memory crystal, a gift from the Sentinel, containing the foundational root of the Lidhendorian language. She did not return to a hero's welcome. She returned to a world subtly, yet irrevocably, altered. The surge of magic had been gentle but pervasive. Young elves found they could communicate with plants with a clarity unseen for ages. Starlight seemed brighter, and the very air hummed with a potential that had been dormant for centuries. The elders, initially fearful and suspicious, could not deny the tangible change in the world. When Alara stood before them, she spoke not of conquest or power, but of reconciliation. She shared not just the history of Lidhendor, but its language, its art, its philosophy, the very essence of what had been lost. She became the bridge between a forgotten past and an uncertain future, establishing a new school of learning not in a stuffy library, but in the open air, under the twin moons. She taught that language is not a cage for thought, but a window to perception, that the recovery of Lidhendor's dialects was allowing them to think thoughts that had been impossible for 1,000 years. The prophecies she revealed were not treated as fixed, inevitable destinies, but as complex moral and philosophical roadmaps, discussed and debated in town squares and around family hearths, reintegrating a long-lost tradition of deep cosmic inquiry into everyday life. This cultural renewal wasn't about recreating the past. It was about healing a collective amnesia, giving her people access to the full spectrum of their own identity. Yet, for all the renewal she fostered, Elara herself was forever changed. The weight of preservation was a quiet, constant companion. She would sometimes stand on a high balcony, looking out at the now thrumming world, and feel the immense solitude of being the only living soul who remembered the silence before the dawn, who had spoken to the last speaker and bargained with water sprites. She carried the truth of the great betrayal within her, a somber knowledge that true wisdom often lies in understanding profound brokenness. She had unlocked a golden age, but she would forever walk in its light with the gentle shadow of that knowledge beside her, a guardian not just of a place, but of a truth, ensuring that the second dawn of magic would be guided by empathy, understanding, and the hard-won wisdom of what it truly means to be lost, and then